Is everybody ready to start up again here? Are you ready? I'd like to recall the May 9th, 2017 meeting to order. First item up is to consider approval of the agenda. Joe, did you have any?
Yeah, I wanted to add the executive session, if possible, regarding real estate options, regarding a project that, with the open space funding. I'd like to provide an update to the board.
Okay, there'll be an item later for that I will be recusing myself from. So, any other changes, anyone? Hearing none, someone like to make a motion to approve the agenda as amended? Moved by Colleen, seconded by Josh. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Great. Next is consider approving the minute meetings of April 11th and April 25th. Let's first do April 11th. Are there any changes? Hearing none, someone like to make a motion to approve?
So moved.
Moved by Colleen. Second?
I'll second.
Seconded by John. Any comments? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, next is. Abstain, right. Jerry wasn't here. Next is approve the minutes of April 25th. Anyone have any comments?
Yeah, I have,
Okay.
and I apologize for not having introduced these earlier, Joe, but there are several typos in John Zacconi's name on, I believe, pages 6 and 7, and Lim Walker's got a B in it.
Thank you, that's good.
Okay. Anything else? Someone like to make a motion to approve the minutes of April 25th as amended?
So moved.
Moved by Jerry, second. Seconded by John. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? One abstention. Colleen. All right, next is public comments. We certainly just had a lot of those for the last hour. If anyone has anything they'd like to say that on a topic over which this board has jurisdiction that is not on tonight's agenda, please come up, identify yourself, and speak. Hello, Dorothy.
Hello,
Thea.
I'm Dorothy Pinar, and I'm the current president of the Shelburne Historical Society, and I just wanted to just give everybody an update. We're having our annual membership meeting Monday. Everyone's welcome to come. We hope that everyone will think about joining the society. But I wanted to talk to you about something that we've been discussing that has sort of a kind of a nexus with the town. We have a website that we're developing. Right now it's just really kind of a pretty little page, but we want to make it a research tool. So we're going to be discussing and trying to develop our website to be able to do some scanning of things that are in the vault, historical information. We think that that's a benefit to the whole community and also a benefit to the town in that people will not necessarily have to go into the vault and handle things that are becoming old and historic. And so I just wanted to let you know, because that's going to be something that we're really going to be focusing on for the next year. And that's all I have
Thank
to
you very
say.
much, Dorothy. I
You're
saw
welcome.
something about your son singing.
Yes, indeed.
Good luck with that.
Thank you.
Anyone else have a comment? Hearing none, it's time for select board comments. Well, we started this side, let's start this side. Josh? Jerry?
We had quite a weekend, celebrating the community, beginning Friday with the fire rescue dinner, Saturday with the Little League opening, and the green pickup, and Sunday with the race. And I'd like to express my appreciation, and I'm sure will be joined by everyone else, for all of the volunteers in town that make all of that possible and give us such a glorious existence. Thank you for everybody who contributed and helped with all of those activities over what was an extraordinary weekend. Thank you.
Thanks, and you should have seen Jerry dance at the fire and rescue banquet. Okay, I might have made that part up. John?
Thanks.
Colleen?
I'll second what Jerry said about Saturday, and I've been to many baseball opening days, and for the second week of May, and it was rainy and cold, but everybody's spirit was there, and it was fun, and lots of shopping, and all the stores were open with little deals. It was nice. And I don't normally do this, but I'm going to wish my husband a happy 9th anniversary. And he did mention the fact that I chose you guys over him tonight, so
Well, you were late.
I was late.
Congratulations. All right, I'm good. Joe? Town Manager's Report.
All right, a few months ago when we applied for the paving grant, I think I told the select board, well, we're doing this, but there's no way we're gonna get it 2 years in a row. Well, that was, luckily we have Ann working on our behalf now, and so I think this is the first time, at least that I don't know, maybe Peter can look back for other years, but we received the paving grant from the state again, 2 years in a row. That's really unusual and great for us, so that's $98,000 that we will take.
How much?
$98,000.
Here, here, Ann.
I wish everybody could see you dancing. I wish they could have the camera.
A Director of Administration is dancing.
That's right. So that was nice. That was definitely a good surprise. Like I said, we, it doesn't hurt to apply, but I didn't think we were going to get it 2 years in a row, and it was great for us to get it. And I also want to wish Laura Keenan the best in her future. She announced publicly last week, I believe, that she's moving on with her professional career. She's taking a job as one of the state library consultants. So I guess we won't be completely void of her services in the future, but I just want to, on a personal and professional note, Laura's been just wonderful to work with. She is a team player. You know, library directors and libraries can operate in their own silos if they want, but she has always made the effort to work with our rec department, to work with our buildings and grounds, to work with Paul Goodrich, to work with me, to work with Ann. It's never been an issue, and it's been a lot of fun. So I wish you a lot of good luck in your next job.
Laura, I wanted to say something, but I knew it was appropriate for Joe. You are really a special person, and what you have brought to our community has just been a joy to behold. You've really made a difference. You've improved our library. You've brought us to a better place, and you're really a special person, so thank you very much.
I kind of felt the same way, but publicly, you know how much I absolutely love working with you, and think you're just an amazing person, and the power that you brought to the library project. And it feels good that you'll continue to be doing this for other libraries and in other communities, and including ours. And I love the fact that you're still here. You're still present. You're still here for this item number 13.
Thank you, Joe. Go ahead, please.
You
Everybody
have
say something.
an extraordinary capacity to inspire, and our loss is offset only in the sense that you're now going to inspire the state. And we wish you the very, very best in that new position.
Okay. If you want to say anything, you know. All right, our next item is item number 8. With our Planning Commission Annual CBC Commission Board Committee Report to the Select Board. We have members from the Planning Commission here and their chair, Mr. Jamie Hines, straight from a 2-week engagement at the Sands.
Any objections if I sit?
No.
Okay. Given the hour, I will put my litigator hat on and try to keep it concise. I'll do my best. So, let's see. Well, you've seen the report. I know you've read it. Gary uses 24 VSA 117 as bedtime reading, I know. So
I do.
We'll cut to the chase on this. Our mission and charge is statutory. As you know, the two big things we do are the comprehensive plan as well as regulatory responsibility for both zoning bylaw and subdivision bylaw updates. Wanted to also highlight here, I am reporting on behalf of the Housing Subcommittee, which we formed early last year. The Housing Subcommittee's chair is here in the audience. Ron Bouchard is here, so if there are any questions for that group, he's happy to field them, as am I. The charge of the Housing Subcommittee is in one of the attachments here, if you're interested in more detail, but one of the key focus area for that group is really data collection. As you know, no policy agenda, looking to use what will be a deliverable in the form of a booklet that highlights various data relating to housing trends, building permits, et cetera, to help inform decision-making, both within the Planning Commission, town plan, and across other CBCs in the town. Second question in our report out here relates to diversity on our CBC. Similar response to last year. Some of this will look familiar. I feel like we have a very diverse group generally as far as professional experience goes. Geography, I think we're well balanced within the group. The one area that we called out here for awareness is just the gender is starting to get a little bit skewed, and that happens right across boards, depends who puts their hands up. But to the extent we can, do some active solicitation to interested female candidates, it'd probably be a good idea. I think, I'm sure Kate Lally would appreciate that as well. So with that, we'll move right on to question 3, which is really kind of the year in review, essentially. A lot of the content here will look very familiar to what you see in the town plan, where we include an excerpt that really speaks to sort of our accomplishments over the past year. Couple highlights for the group just to call out. We did a lot, I think. We covered a lot of ground. Worked on a couple things of interest, I think, just that are worth repeating. A solar siting ordinance came into existence, which we felt was a nice collective effort within the group responding to a need in town. So far, seems good, seems well received, and we'll see. I mean, that area is always in play, as we know, so it's very active at the State House and will continue to be, so we'll stay on top of that, working with our legislators. We worked on a number of zoning-related issues, spanning the spectrum from the mundane to the scintillating. Adult-oriented businesses was one that seemed to generate a lot of eyeballs and people in the seats, but we also worked on storage trailers, which is, maybe not at that end of the spectrum, but so we delivered recently a package to the select board. You saw everything from sidewalk and path requirements to sign lighting. Collaborating with the DRB, this is a list, so to speak, that came from them at least 18 months ago, I'd say. So we worked our way through some interesting issues that we feel we progressed the bylaw. And we'll continue to collaborate with the DRB. At some point, they'll develop a new list, and this is what we do. There'll be this cycle of where are they seeing issues, we'll work to respond as we see fit. The year in review, the other highlight I just wanted to mention, because I felt like it was very well received on the Planning Commission, was parcelization. So we had a wildlife biologist come in from the state who was an amazing individual, a gentleman named Jens Helke, who brought this wealth of experience and knowledge in an area that was probably a little bit under the radar for us as a group. And it was a moment where I think all of us realized, wow, this is something that might help guide future decision-making within the Planning Commission that might translate into potential town plan content at some level. So an interesting area that certainly felt like fertile ground for more exploration, both within the Planning Commission and town-wide.
We have a wildlife guy right here.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah, I think
I bring
this
it
is
up
an area
actually
that would be...
seriously. If you're going to make changes in regard to that, the town plan, it would be
Not
great
sure if
for
we will,
Josh
but
to
I think
weigh
it's
in.
an area that would interest you. Absolutely.
And certainly the Natural Resources Committee has some really qualified people on it.
Definitely, yep. So that was our year in review. On the Housing Committee, Subcommittee side, they're doing a ton of work. This is a group that is somewhat behind the scenes, but I did just want to make it clear that there's some great deliverables that are going to come out of this. Pam Bragnon from the Regional Planning Commission has been a rock star on that subcommittee, and we're lucky to have her. And,
She's got her hands up.
and the entire team has been wonderful. So we're lucky to have, 2 former Planning Commission chairs on that group, and Brian and Ron, and Mark Brooks is also willing to stay on there, so Tracy Bowden's been wonderful too. So we're looking for good things to come from that group over the next 12 months. Jump into question 4 here, which is our 3 goals for the next 12 months. The big one is kind of the obvious one, the comprehensive plan update, which Gary did a nice public service announcement around earlier. Thank you for that. We will be talking more about that later, so I won't get into too much detail, but that February 2019 date will come much quicker than most people realize, especially when you're sitting in the chairs of other planning commissioners. We have a lot of work to do there, so we'll talk more though. The rural district, this is a continued focus for us. It's an interesting one because I find we don't have a definite target in place. It's an area where we've been very intentional about just letting it start to find its own course. Everything from, we've talked about build-out studies, exploring whether there might be opportunities for planning grants, as well as just how can we continue to collaborate. You know, Natural Resources Commission, we're looking to pull together a joint retreat where we might be able to just help build a framework for the next iteration of the town plan, as well as get some ideas from the next open space plan that they'll share with us. So we'll spend more time on this, nothing concrete as far as what we're trying to accomplish, really just continued learning, continued outreach to the community about how the town wants to see the rural district grow, because it will grow. It's just a question of where that growth will go. So we want to do the best we can to be ahead of that as opposed to reacting. And the last piece, again, is a big one. This is the Route 7 North form-based code, Shelburne Road form-based code, what we're calling 2.0. Again, really trying to fine-tune the existing form-based code in a couple specific areas. Stormwater, a big one, which I know the select board is very laser-focused on, and Joe in particular will spend more time there. Connected infrastructure, just heard a lot about that in the previous agenda item. Building materials, signage, and public art are 3 other areas that we identified with the consultant as spots in the current code where it just wasn't quite enough. Very, areas where there was room for improvement. So we're excited by what we're going to see from this. On Thursday, we have the community workshop, which will bring together, hopefully a lot of people in the room to help weigh in on the current updates to the form-based code, and we'll see where it goes. At some point in time, you'll have a next draft of the proposal on your desk. So more to come on that. Next question here: what improvements? I think every committee will have the same input on this. To the extent we can improve the teleconferencing, video conferencing, that would be a great thing. Understand the budget constraints on that, so nobody will push on that, but there is a need there. I know we're going to talk about economic development later, so I won't spend too much time on this one, other than to say that we weave in and out of this topic on the Planning Commission. There's a strong amount of interest in this topic. Ann Hogan, who's in the audience tonight, Planning Commissioner, has been a tremendous driver for this topic over the course of the past 2-3 years. And we're looking forward to what's going to come out of this, and obviously interested and open to providing whatever support we can as a commission on this topic. Student program, question 7. It's been awesome. We've been thrilled by our experience with the student program. Excited to just continue to get more students in. Get more vocal is what I would sort of keep driving. It does take a little bit of time to get comfortable on these commissions, but at the same time, we're really interested in their input. It's an important voice in the community that we're missing on a lot of our CBCs. The only call out there, just as food for thought, was to the extent we can get input on our own actions and activities as a commission from the students as they leave the board, that would be great. What are we doing well? What aren't we doing well? How can we improve their experience? That would be helpful for us. And then the last question, anything else? We're excited about our 2 new commissioners coming on board, Andrew Everett and Perry Gagliardi. And we're we're open to any thoughts, comments the select board has. We're excited to continue to collaborate. We're, again, fortunate to have that housing subcommittee working hard on their deliverables, and just wanted to thank them publicly for the efforts to date. Thank you.
Jamie, you're a great chairman. You really are. And you happen to chair a board that is comprised of really spectacular volunteers, really special, and you're losing two. Is there anything you want to say or anything?
Yeah, I mean, we are losing two, so I'm reluctant to get into too much detail right now, but
Is it open, the info about both of them?
I don't know. I would say let's hold off on,
Okay.
on the announcement there, but we will be losing two. Obviously, we have two new appointments, so more to come on that, but thank you. Yeah, we have a wonderful group.
I want to thank you for the way the Planning Commission worked with the Select Board to, on an expedited basis, to address an issue that was almost universally of concern to residents in Shelburne, and that was the adult entertainment inquiry that Dean received from a Burlington attorney. And what normally takes a long time, by working together, we were able to push that through in a reasonable yet legal manner. So I give a lot of credit to your board for jumping on that. And also, I appreciate the comment about collaborating with the DRB and the progress you made. That's part of the program that we've been doing here for 3 years now, of which this report is one of them. And out of this report came the DRB making almost like a punch list to send over to the Planning Commission to say, hey, these are the problems we keep seeing. Can you do something? And you guys are working great together. So I think that's very helpful. Does anyone have any questions or comments for Jamie?
I just have one comment. I also wanted to recognize the work that was done on the solar ordinance. You know, that has only been used once at Shelburne Farms, but they were quite amenable to reviewing it and working with us and using it, and it was pretty user-friendly. And I know abutting towns have taken a page out of our book and are using a similar template. So kudos to the group for putting a good, clean approach there. And I think that was, it's very necessary. And I think that, you know, it just shows that if everybody pays attention, we can get things done, so.
Yeah, thanks for using your legal skills on that. Saved us some time and money. Anyone else have anything for Jamie?
Yeah, it's an extraordinary report, Jamie. I mean, in every respect, not just accomplishment, but its content and it's simply its presentation. It's a great, it makes you feel really good in this position to be able to rely on that kind of communication from those who are sharing equally decisions in the best interest of the town. And I was particularly taken by the retreat and think that the idea of examining the open space plan in the context of comprehensive plan is a really good idea. And I'm especially pleased to see the mention of the housing committee, whose work is probably going to be even more important to us as we move forward with what I hope will be an economic development initiative, because your effort is really integral and basic to any kind of economic development initiative. So it's a pleasure to be able to thank all of you for what you've done, and I'm really happy to see the write-up.
Thanks, Jerry. Anyone else have anything? Anyone, any other members? Please, just grab the mic and identify yourself and speak away.
The name's Doug Roby. When you go through your planning process, how much
and the Design Review Board, how much personal preference is based into it? The reason I ask is several years ago in a Boston suburb, the bank that I worked for was putting in a branch, and literally one of the persons on the Design Review Board had very specific feelings about the color that he or she liked and what sort of cornices could be used and stuff like that. Finally, the bank had to sue the Design Review Board because it had gone overboard. Just, it's a word of caution.
I'll try to respond. Not sure
Yeah,
if there's
I
a
like
question there or
purple.
not, but just to clarify, the Planning Commission is distinct from the DRB, so, but to your question, I think the one thing that we might start to see some of that come out in is when we get into detail around building materials and the form-based code north conversation, that does start to become articulating aesthetics at some level, so there might be an issue you might want to attend on Thursday night to hear more about.
Thanks for bringing it up, Doug. Does anyone else have any comments on this item? If not, Jamie, thank you very much. And Ron, thank you for the Housing Subcommittee work, this and your whole group. It is a topic that this Select Board has identified as something we'd like to investigate, and that is the small house communities. And what Kansas City has done, for example, in which they started a program for small houses for veterans in need. Yes. So it's,
It's a very interesting topic. I mean, right now, about 1% of the house sales are,
can you
about
go-
20.
Ron Bouchard.
Let me just quickly mention it. I mean, in 1978, the average house size was under 1,800 square feet in this country, and it's currently close to 2,700 square feet. And that's in conjunction with declining family sizes. So people spend a third to half of their income supporting these large homes, and there's also environmental concerns, time concerns, upkeep, et cetera, utilities. So this movement's gaining some traction. And I think it's wonderful that the town's addressing it, and we look forward to working on it in the future. So, thank you.
Great, thanks, Ron. All right, with that, let's move on to the next agenda item. Thanks again, Jamie. Which is item number 9, consider approving the fiscal year 2018 annual budget for the Chittenden County Solid Waste District.
So our Sarah Reeves is not here yet.
Correct. Sarah's has a double header tonight.
So can we move it around?
Yes.
Is everybody on the board good with doing that later?
Yep.
Okay, great. Jamie, you ready to jump right into the work session?
Nope, you have 10 first. You have,
10.
you have an interview.
Oh, yes, I skipped one. Interview applicants for committees, boards, so, Joe, why don't you give us a little intro?
Yeah, we have one applicant. You're Peggy, okay. Good, nice to meet you. Peggy Day has applied for the only open spot on the SNRCC. I know that her and Gail had a conversation today, so she's here to interview for appointment. And her
Intellectual property attorney, huh?
I think you're
Good
gonna have
for
to
you.
come up to a mic.
So Peggy, what we ask people to do is just please tell us something about yourself and why you're interested in serving on this committee.
Okay, we recently moved here from Connecticut. It's been a slow move in, so I'd say we've been full-time here 3 or 4 months. We're kind of settled in now, and we have our adult son who has a disability kind of set up and, you know, well suited here. So it's time for me to get involved again. I've been involved in a lot of things over the course of the years. One of the things that interested me about the natural resources and conservation is that in the town I come from, it was a town not unlike Shelburne, but it had very little open use, dedicated open space. And the first selectman at the time asked me to head up a committee to form a land trust. And so it's a different model than in this town. In the case of New Fairfield, the town gave us seed money to basically create a 501c3 land trust. So I headed that up. I chaired it and kind of launched it. And that's where my heart is. And we lived in a town that had a lot of nice spaces around it. We were adjacent to a state forest. There was a 1,000-acre wilderness school up the road. And so, open space, recreational space, undeveloped space is near and dear to me. It's kind of an avocation and very different than intellectual property law.
Well, yeah. Thank you very much, Peggy, for your interest. Does anyone have any questions or comments for Peggy? Anyone here? Joe, this is for a term that continues until when?
Yeah, this is the middle of a term, so instead of it being a 3-year term until 2020, it actually, this term, the open term comes to an end April 1st, 2019.
Okay, and then you can sign up for another 20 years.
There you go.
Thank you very much for your interest.
Thank you.
Someone like to,
Move to appoint Peggy Day to the Natural Resources and Conservation Commission for a term starting tonight and ending April 1st, 2019.
moved by Colleen, is there a second? Seconded by Josh, any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
That was easy, huh?
Yes, thank you.
Peggy, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Okay. Now I think we have someone who we're
Okay.
missing, right?
Yeah, I think we can go back to 9
Okay,
now.
so we'll go back to 9. Consider approving the fiscal year 2018 annual budget for the Chittenden County Solid Waste District. Joe, why don't I turn it over to you to turn it
Yeah,
over to our guest?
Right, real quick, and this is Sarah's first time before the Shelburne Selectboard, and this is an annual item that the board must do in order for CSWD to have their budget approved. All of the member municipalities, Shelburne being one of them, I don't know if, I guess the requirement is that they all approve the budget, or there's a majority of them that need to approve. Correct. So that's why she's here, to present the budget, answer any questions. I think I put the short version in the packets, and the long version of the packet was available online, of the budget was available online.
Thanks. Sarah, all yours. Thanks for coming.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the flexibility. You are the third stop for me for tonight, so save the best for last.
Now we're talking. That makes the minutes better.
So thank you again for your time. I appreciate it. As Joe mentioned, my name is Sarah Reeves. I'm the new general manager for the Chittenden Solid Waste District. And I am pleased to say that the financial outlook for CSWD remains strong. I'm also pleased to say that we are not recommending an increase to the solid waste management fee for this year. So we do have enough funds in that fee stabilization account to continue to maintain solid waste management fee as approved several years ago. We're also looking forward to probably having enough to also keep the fee as it is for fiscal 19 as well. I can't guarantee that, but it looks good. So that's starting off with the good news. Also good news is that, yes, the budget has increased this year, however, so have the expended revenues. So we're looking at our operating revenues for fiscal 18 at $11,282,932. And the operating expenditures at $10,525,152. So that would leave us with a net revenue over expenditures of just over $750,000. So to the good. Several items factored into the large increase over last year's budget, mainly in that I asked my team to come to me with a realistic budget. So we really looked hard at what the costs were looking to be and what the opportunities were looking to be. So one of the main drivers in the costs this year, as everyone is feeling, our healthcare costs, insurance costs are going up. And some of that is just simply an unknown. So we're expecting those to come in lower than the projection. However, we don't know. A lot of it will depend on what happens at the federal level, as I think we're all experiencing. We are also not asking for a tipping fee increase at the material recovery facility, so that fee will remain the same too, which is good. We're also looking at, while our revenues are expected, tipping fees for biosolids are probably going to increase because of the amount of material we're looking to manage. The actual management fee is going to be lower. So the fee that we pass on for brokering the material to the member communities who use our biosolids program will be lower. We're just looking at not having to spend as much staff time. So that fee will be lowered for the towns as well. The other fees that I wanted to highlight for you, we are looking to increase our tipping fee at Green Mountain Compost, and that is basically to help normalize the market. We have been significantly subsidizing the tipping fee there for quite some time, and I asked my staff this year to try to bring it closer to market rate. So that's what we're doing. So we're recommending that we raise the tip fee at Green Mountain Compost from $45 a ton to $52. The average market rate is around $50 to $60 per ton, so it kind of brings us more in line with the private sector. I think that's probably a good thing. And we're also looking to add a fee at our drop-off centers, one fee, $1.50 per bucket for organics, but just for our customers who are only using our drop-off centers for organics. So if you recall, a couple of years ago, we implemented a fee at the drop-off center to include organics management in the cost of trash and recycling services. So if you are continuing to use the drop-off centers for trash and recycling and organics, the fee is still embedded in the cost of the trash. If you're only using the drop-off center just to drop off free, quote, free, food scraps, there will now be a $1.50 per bucket charge for that service. And those are the highlights as far as the fee schedules and the anticipated revenues and expenditures, and I am happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. How do you like replacing your predecessor?
No one can replace Tom. Tom is irreplaceable, but I am doing my very best to lead the team and lead the district and hopefully do him proud.
You know, this is the best town in the district.
I've heard that.
Right?
I've heard that.
And you know, of all the commissioners, Shelburne has the best commissioner.
Well, that I know.
Tim Laux, right?
Absolutely.
Does anyone have any questions or comments on this?
Yeah, I have a quick one. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
On your position.
Thank you.
I noticed in discussing operating expenditures, you referred quite often to increased volume of material.
Yes, yes.
Is that principally due to economic activity, to demographic trends? And might that include more, call it compliance or more tendency for residents to make good use of the various recycling, composting, and hazardous materials drop-offs?
All of those things. You are exactly right. It's interesting that trash tends to be somewhat of a leading indicator of economic trends. You know, as times were going bad, we started in Rhode Island, where I worked previously, we could see our volumes dipping down. As the economy was recovering, they were going back up. So certainly that is part of it. Part of it is due to the continuing mandate of Act 148. So we're looking to have to manage particularly more organics and more food scraps, so that's part of the equation as well. There are also other materials that we're looking at that we want to keep out of the general waste stream. So they may either have a new market may be emerging, there may be other uses for those materials. Because we do still need to meet, again, that state mandate of pounds per person, so we need to keep driving that down. As the demographics change, as the economy improves, that makes it more difficult. So we're looking for different ways, different programs to be able to pull some of those materials out. The low-hanging fruit has been gotten. So we're looking at some of those other things, construction, demolition debris. We're looking at bulky, rigid plastics like the turtle sandboxes, you know, things of that nature that really take up a lot of room. Mattresses, you know, electronics have been coming out.
Where did that come from?
That comes from my experience of having people call me on the phone and say, I've got this turtle sandbox. How do I get rid of it? And I say, well, funny you should ask. So it's managing those bulky things that don't fit in a cart, right? So all of those things that also the haulers don't want to handle, can't handle. The district needs to find a way to manage those. So that's part of it. The household hazardous waste budget is looking to increase. Again, with that, you simply never know what's going to come to the rover, come to the depot. And those prices are by material. So if someone is cleaning out a barn or a garage or a shed from a relative who's passed, and maybe they had a dental practice in their home and they've got jars of mercury, we need to find a way to manage that properly. It happens all the time. So those are all part of, they go into the equation, but really you've hit it right on the head. Exactly.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great question, Jerry. Josh, you got something?
Yeah, just curiosity, I mean, your material sales is like a significant increase in, you know,
Yes.
and the story has always been, boy, we can't find a place to sell a lot of this stuff. So what makes that up?
Yeah, so, and again, coming from Rhode Island, I managed a material recovery facility for 1 million people, and so we were putting through about 120,000 tons a year. We do about 47,000 tons here. We're looking to have an increase this year in the amount of tons that go through, so that's one thing. There'll be increased volume. Also keep in mind when we were, CSWG, we were developing the fiscal 17 budget, it was still 2016 and the markets were still not great. So there's been a significant recovery, not to 2011, record levels, however, strong. So those have come up strong, particularly in scrap metal. We were having a very difficult time in moving scrap metal, and that has rebounded quite a bit. So we've seen some good revenues this year, but I'm still being conservative on the value, basically the market basket value. So I want to make sure that we're conservative there, even though right now the value of our products in the market basket are about $110 a ton. Still want to budget below that, again, to hedge the up and down. And it is a volatile market. They're always volatile. Anything that can happen on the global market will affect us. We are part of that global partnership. So we know that as things change in China, as things are happening in Turkey, those will affect us. We're lucky here that we have a good quality material and that we have a consistent delivery and we have consistent customers. So we're in constant contact with our customers to make sure that we're meeting their specs. Are there any new products that we can pull out? Are there improvements that we can make to our material recovery facility? And that's where I think we'll see a lot of opportunity. So yes, it is a big jump from the fiscal 17 budget being made in fiscal 16, but we think it's still a conservative guess.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.
I want to give Tim, our rep, a chance. Do you want to add anything, say anything?
Sure. Tim Laux, the Shelburne rep to the CSWD. I guess just 2 comments. First, a lot of you know and have worked with Tom Morrow, who left us last year, and Sarah's replaced Tom. Tom built a very, very strong organization, and so Sarah is fortunate. The team that she leads and the staff of CSWD is really an exceptional group of people. I guess my only other comment I would make is that they do an excellent job of putting together a very detailed budget and go through a very rigorous process, and a select group of people, very, very dedicated folks at the board level, work over many months to go ahead and vet that and go into great detail. So this is, you can rest assured that the document that you're seeing in front of you has received some very, very close scrutiny. And I'm very, very, it's good to welcome Sarah aboard, and I think you should feel pretty comfortable with the document that you've got in front of you.
Thanks, Tim, and thanks for representing us. Appreciate it. Sarah, it's a pleasure to have you join us.
Thank you.
Presentation is great. We have a
Thanks.
comment or a question from Doug Roby in the back. Doug, can you grab the mic or just?
I can be loud enough. What's your spoilage now due to black plastic in your recycles?
So the question is regarding black plastic. And there still is not a great market for black plastic. And what happens to the other recyclables is if too much black plastic is included with the bale, it lowers the value. There is a market for black plastic only. So if we could sort out only the black plastic and create enough quantity and quality of that material, we could sell it. Our current material recovery facility is not able to do that. And that's something I'm going to be looking at over the next few years is our infrastructure needs, and that's one of them. So what are the opportunities that we may have in the current material mix to pull these things out and get them to markets that do exist? The black plastic market exists. It's not great. But really what we want to do is by keeping it out, it helps to maintain the value of the rest of the plastic so that we can continue to move those materials quickly out to market. So as far as the amount of black plastic, it is a very, very small segment of the overall plastics market, which is why they allow a little bit of contamination in the bale. It's fine. Too much starts to lower the value.
Have you tried to determine the sources of where it comes from? For example, every time I go into my Chinese takeout place and I get a black plastic,
Yeah.
takeout. I said, can you guys switch to another color, because I can't recycle this.
This is it's a great question, and the question was, are there ways to identify the sources of the black plastic? A lot of it tends to be also, there are several types of black plastic. For example, the ones used in greenhouses and agricultural uses, that is a completely different plastic that would not be suitable for these household item bales. Some of the black plastic is actually in men's bathroom products like shampoo and bath gel. So that gets to actually contacting the company as a consumer to say, hey, you know what, you can use a different color and I would still buy your product. In fact, I'd probably be even more incented to buy your product. And as far as what we have done, we are able to contact on the local level, and we've done this with several breweries, actually, several brewers, who were using black plastic kind of caps on their cans for 4-packs and 6-packs, and they were using black, and we contacted them and said, actually, is there a different color you can use, because we can't recycle that? And they said, you know what, yeah, there is, and they switched. So we do have the ability where we can identify them, and where there's a viable option for to change, they'll do it. So we have started to do that and to identify some of those areas. But if you have routinely, if you know of particular places that say, geez, you'd think that they could do clear versus black, we're happy to make a call.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Hey,
Every
Doug.
Chinese takeout will have black.
Yeah.
I'll mark
Thanks,
it
Doug.
down.
All right, so
Thank
I'd
you.
like to entertain a motion to approve the Chittenden Solid Waste District's 2018 proposed budget.
So moved.
Moved by Jerry, is there a second? Seconded by Colleen, any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Sarah and Tim,
you.
thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And
I
welcome
appreciate
to
your time.
Shelburne.
Thank you very much, appreciate it.
All right, our next item is item 11, work session with the Planning Commission on developing a revised town plan. Can we finish the entire plan in 4 minutes? Or how about just some practical things? Jamie? And I guess I'm turning it over to you and Dean.
Yeah, I
on
think
this.
Dean and I will co-pilot this one. So as you heard, February 29th is a key date to keep in mind as a target. And from there, I will let Dean walk you through the slides, and then to the extent you have questions, I'm here to
Doug,
answer.
excuse me, could you turn off one of those lights? Just one of them. Thank you. Thanks.
So has been mentioned a couple of times tonight, the plan does expire in February of 2019. The statute, the law regarding town plans for many, many years has said that they last for 5 years. There has been a change to the law, and we're kind of caught in this transition period. We did not get an extension, but when the next town plan is updated, it'll last for 8 years, not 5. The Planning Commission has been talking about the town plan update for a few months now, and have started, I guess I will say, to select a path for updating it. What the town plan must include and the issues it must address, those things are specified or determined in statute. The sections of the plans are often called elements. There are also statutory goals that the plans are to help achieve, and that's especially important if we want what's called an approved plan. Towns aren't required to plan. However, if they want to have regulations, they must plan, and they must plan in a particular way. So that's one of the parts of the Planning Commission's job, is to follow the statute and to make sure the statutory requirements are followed. Like I said, regional approval is something that can happen. It's not required, but it is required if you want certain things. So if we want to continue to operate the impact fee program, we need to have regional, it's a consultation process. It also makes the town more competitive for grants when you're able to say you have a regionally approved plan. And in Chittenden County, the vast majority of the plans are regionally approved, so we would have a comparative disadvantage if we didn't do that.
There's also a regional role in providing comments and making suggestions to communities about things that their plan should include, and the statute also says that the Planning Commission should consider those comments. We've had those kinds of reviews informally in the past, and so the reason that this bullet talks about flood resiliency is that there's a statutory requirement that was added regarding flood resiliency in the last few years, and that's one of the pieces that we don't really have covered in the current plan, so it would need to be covered in the future plan. Then I just have a bullet on the importance of reliable data sources. That regardless of the format that the town plan takes, it needs to have good data behind it. There is something called the Municipal Planning Manual. It's got a series of recommendations. The planning commissioners have looked at excerpts of the planning manual and have considered some of those recommendations. The planning manual says focus on the vision and don't spend as much time or space in your plan documenting the past. Planning manual also talks about, though, documenting trends and important things that will shape the decisions. It's also possible to have some of this stuff in a separate document. That's a point that the manual makes. Structuring your plan around big ideas is something the manual mentions, and I think this is a topic that the planning commissioners have been really latching onto the last meeting or two, this idea of updating the vision and coming up with a short, concise expression of what it is the people of Shelburne want Shelburne to be like in the future. And so that's been part of the work that I'm assuming will be utilized in the updated version of the plan. Utilizing maps and images and graphics, I think the next version of the Shelburne Town Plan will certainly be a more attractive document. There's a lot more mapped information available today. It just seems like it grows by the week, taking out unnecessary ideas. But
Just jumping in on the big idea piece, if and when we get to a big idea, we would love your early input on that to get a gut check to make sure that directionally we're going where the town wants to be, as opposed to just 7 people in a room deciding what the big idea is.
I welcome that, because as you might remember, years ago, maybe 7, I don't know, many years ago, that didn't happen, and it caused problems. In fact, it was more than 7 years ago, the plan was sent up, and the entire plan was sent back to the Planning Commission, and it was just a waste of effort. Go ahead.
The current town plan, it's in 2 volumes. It runs many pages. It's longer than I believe the commission today would like the next town plan to be. So taking out unnecessary information or unfeasible ideas, it kind of fits with this idea of focusing on the most important stuff. That's something the planning manual promotes, and I believe that planning commissioners feel the same way, and it'll help shorten the document. The Planning Commission has looked at a lot of town plans for surrounding communities or some further away, and one of the plans that they found appealing is the plan for the town of Ferrisburg that is reaching the final stages towards adoption. If people on the board would like to see it, I can pull it up separately, but I just wanted you all to know that there is a document that is, in a sense, a target in terms of the length and the format and the layout that commissioners seem to favor, and I could see them modeling the next town plan after. Okay, so this is not necessarily going to show up as clearly as I would like. This is a conceptual schedule, and I'm going to just talk through a little bit of it just for your benefit. We've been talking about February of 2019 as the deadline. If nothing happens, that's when the plan will expire. And when we look at that date and we start looking and working backwards, there are some drop-dead dates that you can derive. And one of them is, really, if we're going to try to have the new plan done by February of 2019, then the hearing by the select board would be January 22nd of 2019. You work back. The select board would receive that document first meeting in December of 2018. Before it gets to the select board, it's got to be subject to hearings by the planning commission, and so the planning commission would have to approve it at their meeting at the first session that they have in in November. They typically have only one meeting in November. So we work back, we're well into 2017. Things are going to move very, very quickly. This is the absolute latest that these things could happen, and the plan could be adopted, a new plan could be adopted before the old one expired. Now, we get into this place in the schedule, again, working back, where the dates become a little bit fuzzier. Certain tasks have been split out just because they're somewhat discrete, finalizing the maps, having an informal hearing, but really there's this idea of having an initial draft, I call it an alpha draft, but I don't have a date next to that. But there's also the idea that after there's an alpha draft, there would be a beta draft, and if we want to give ourselves wiggle room, that second full draft really should be ready by May of next year. If we really want to put ourselves in a box, it could possibly be done as late as July. But between now and then, we're going to be doing a lot of work, taking the material and putting it in the format that would fit something similar to the Ferrisburg plan. I did want to make this last point before answering any questions or turning things over to Jamie. A feature of statute that used to exist doesn't exist any longer. Back in the day, one of the reasons why my earlier slides talked about a 2012 version of the plan and a 2014 version is the 2012 version came after a 2011 that was a readoption of a prior plan that bought us more time. We can't do that anymore. So the idea of extending the deadline is not one that we want to fool ourselves as a possibility. So those drop dead.
Your schedule has it, if that final plan reached the select board and the select board had issues with it, we don't make the date.
That's right. And so one of the reasons why I had mentioned to Joe and to you several months ago is that there's going to be really, it's going to be critically important for the select board members to, and the planning commission both, to be talking with each other, because I think even under the best of circumstances, there's not a lot of time.
There'll be need for some joint meetings, there'll be need for you guys to come before us, for each of us to become invested in this process, to learn about it as the planning commission works on it. Otherwise, we won't make the date.
Right.
I agree. Yeah, I mean, I think maybe it's at each of those alpha and beta draft points, we come in and in advance, obviously, you'll have executive summaries that highlight really the changes that we're thinking of, so that it's not going page by page over the course of 5 hours. But I agree. Yeah, I think there's not much slack in that sketched plan there, so.
Yeah, there really isn't any slack, and I'll say, I have seen in a community a case where the select board was told, this is, it's a tight timeline, you need to get invested, and they didn't get invested. And so it really will need to happen if we're gonna meet a deadline this time.
So we know we have to roll up our sleeves, but we've labeled this a work session, so we do want to hear from you as far as, are we thinking about this the right way? Is there anything coming out of your retreat that is of note that we should be prioritizing or at least learning more about to help inform?
Our retreat, that the town plan was an important issue, some of us knew about it, and we've obviously spoken about this. I think it would be a good idea for everyone in the select board to take a look at the Ferrisburg plan in its current state, to see if that is in a format that we're interested in. I think it's important for the select board to weigh in as soon as possible if they agree with the philosophical aspect of shortening the plan. And I'll tell you right off the front, it's one of the things I said immediately to Dean and Jamie and Joe when I discussed it with them. Some people want longer plans. I want it simpler, but maybe you have different views. And if you have different views, I think it's important to let them know as soon as possible.
Yeah. The Ferrisburg plan follows kind of a classical approach of the idea of yesterday, today, and tomorrow, and this is the table of contents portion of their plan, and you can see where they have a forward, but then they have Ferrisburg's past, and its present, and then its future. So that would be the direction it would head in, which is not the current format.
Now, we're not planning on using a consultant with this, or are we?
There's no funding for a consultant. There's funding in the budget that we could use to match if we were successful in getting a planning grant. We could leverage the money that's in the budget, but we don't have enough money to go out and do a project that's driven by the consultant. In the current budget, in the budget for the year 2017, 2018.
Does anyone on the board have any comments or suggestions for the planning commission, Jamie and Dean, in regard to the format of the plan as suggested in the timeline or anything else?
Well, I'm just curious about the consultant question. Is that something that you feel would be helpful to you?
I don't have a ton of experience on the town plan, to be honest with you, so I don't think we need it necessarily, but
We got Dean.
we do have this emphasis on making data-driven decisions, and part of that is making sure that the data we're relying on and pulling into the plan is
Good
is
stuff
valid,
in,
right?
good stuff
So,
out.
yeah. I think the subcommittee's work will be helpful. It'll be current, it'll be,
One of the places where the money could go, and it would involve a consultant, but it's just a different kind of consultant, is something similar to what the Natural Resources Committee did. They used some funding for an editor, and they also had a member who's a graphic designer who volunteered a lot of her services. But there's a lot of good material in the current plan that could be extracted, but
Yeah.
the challenge is knowing when, enough, and it's hard sometimes for the members of the commission, but an outsider, someone completely, sometimes a non-expert is even better, they put together a document that really, really can sing. So maybe that's where the funds would go, and that would come about later down the road.
editing's hard. We all acknowledge that at the table and said it's one thing to say, let's make it shorter, but when you get into the document,
Yeah,
it's
it's
challenging
fine.
to pull stuff out.
We have many committees in town. Are you planning to seek their input, which I'm in favor of? At the same time, I caution you because during one round with the town plan, we had committees submit things that just seemed to get put into the town plan up to the select board, and it had items in there that were problematic, and so that document needed a major rewrite. And now, since we can't re-adopt the existing plan, it's something, I hope you reach out to the other boards, but at the same time, vet what you receive. For example, we had advisory boards the last time that wanted to be boards that could make decisions on, for the entire town, instead of like Natural Resources reporting to the DRB and the DRB making the choices. The last time there was some other avenues that were sought.
Noted, yeah, no, I think the plan is, the group seems to want to collaborate and get input, but at the same time, it's not wholesale,
Yeah.
taking what a commission or board gives us and just implementing it.
And I
So
hope it's,
we'll be
that input
sensitive to
comes
that.
early, because just like you don't want the select board to come in at the last second and say, hey, we want you to change, section 23, and do something different, you don't want any of the other boards to come in at the last minute.
Agreed, yeah. I mean, there's a selfish aspect to sharing the load. I mean, we have other committees and volunteers in town who are more expert in certain areas than
Right.
we are, clearly, so we embrace that input. At the same time, there's just a clock running, so we're sensitive to how much time we can commit to that process, but we'll make sure we do it.
Anyone else have anything else?
Not yet.
Not yet? Anyone here have any comments on this item? Jamie and Dean, thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Really appreciate it, man.
We're not going away.
All right, our next item is item number 12, Introduction to Economic Development Select Board Priority. Joe, why don't you jump in on
Sure,
this?
well, just like the last item, some of the things that are coming out of that came out of the select board retreat, we're certainly making an effort to ensure that they're not just on the select board agenda once here, but that we kind of keep on top of some of the items that came on the select board retreat. I know we didn't rank them out of the select board retreat, but I feel like if we did, economic development as a category was maybe number one. that in terms of a broad category that came out of the retreat. And tonight is a kickoff meeting and introduction of that, and really to solicit a little bit more from the select board about, well, where do you want to go over the next 10 to 12 months and then into the future. And Dean put together a really helpful presentation, I believe, and I'll turn it over to Dean.
Thanks.
Try to go very, very quickly. This was done without the benefit of having attended your retreat. So I took a stab at trying to do some stage setting and framing on this issue. But the background is that you had a discussion at your retreat. You created a list of priorities, and economic development was one of the key items on that list of priorities. I had responded to this news by giving Joe some material that he forwarded to you, and I know that some of you have read and commented on. I included in some of that material copies of the town surveys from 2003 and 2010, some of the economic development related policy statements that are in the town plan. But I think more importantly, I included a copy of a report that was done as part of a different planning study. Douglas Kennedy has a consulting firm that's based over near White River Junction, and he prepared a study that sizes up market opportunities. His focus really was the village, but some of the data isn't available small in areas of the village, so he generalized about the town as a whole. But anyway, select board members have received copies of that, and I think it's a useful starting point for discussions.
Sorry, all these documents are online right now as well.
Yeah.
So it's all available. All these documents that Dean's referring to are online.
Yeah, and I can click through, and I should be able to pull up if people did have a question about something in particular. SDAT is the acronym that's used for the planning process that set the stage for form-based zoning. Just to remind some of you, or to let you know if you didn't know, that project was done using a team of volunteer experts, I'll say, that is organized by the American Institute of Architects. And as part of that planning process, they assembled, although not as, I guess, thoroughly as Doug Kennedy did, but they assembled a lot of information, and they offered some of their own thoughts about economic opportunities in Shelburne, and they were really interested in the Shelburne Road corridor. And then, of course, there is the survey of existing businesses that Ann Hogan has had an important role in, and that Mike Moser gave a presentation on. I forget when it was, but
He's in the back, too.
He's
Well, you know.
back.
Secret agent snuck in.
I thought about some questions, and I know it's really just stirring the pot. Questions that occurred to me as I was learning more about the select board's interest in this is this a strategic big picture effort, or is it more tactical or targeted? And then also, does this mesh with the comprehensive plan? And by that I mean in terms of scope and schedule and scale. But if not, well then why not? And maybe there's a really specific reason it isn't, and there's no wrong answer to it. It's just that it'll help guide people forward. Do people agree what to do already, and it's a matter of doing it? Or does the select board members need to figure out, or want the community to figure out a little bit more about what to do? And if you know what you want to do, well then doing it, of course, is going to be easier. Another question that occurred to me is there a place to start organizing a process? Are we going to be gearing up and doing economic development planning in a more formal way, or are we going to go after low-hanging fruit? And these are just, and again, intended to stir the pot. And do we need to define terms so that people know what's going on? A former member of the Planning Commission who had a deep experience in economic development in the past was someone who spoke repeatedly on the importance of defining what economic development is, because it's one of those terms that really people do bring very different definitions to. Some timely topics. I'm seeing an overlay or an intersection between economic development and some other things of which I'm aware and that I know are of interest and concern to the select board, including blighted properties. And if you go to the digital version of this presentation and you click through those links, you'll find some information on blighted properties, both residential properties and commercial. There are some communities and organizations in Vermont that are doing interesting things on blighted properties. There are some communities that have done some regulatory things, and then there are some organizations, such as a housing organization that operates out of Rutland, that's doing really interesting things on the residential side, dealing with blighted properties. A local development corporation is something that I've heard mentioned, and there are local examples and examples in Vermont of local development corporations. But that's really one option or one path, perhaps as compared to an economic development committee, and I've heard that mentioned already. Parking is something else that had been mentioned or came to my attention as part of the select board's interest. Parking is often mentioned by business owners who are obviously integral to the economic development scene. When people have been asked in Shelburne in the past, they haven't perceived parking to be as big a problem, I would say, as merchants have said it is. But nevertheless, it is something that there is some information about for Shelburne in the past. There have been plans done going back to 2000 that have looked at creating some parking spaces within the village. Some of them have some novel characteristics. But anyway, parking. So if we want to talk about parking, we certainly can, and there are some old documents that relate it. Coordinating economic development with the town plan. One of the statutory requirements is that the town plan address economic development. We have an economic development section within the growth section of our town plan, but as compared to other towns, it's on the lesser scale, lesser end of the scale. But then I acknowledge I don't know all of the things that are on select board's members' minds that may have to do with this topic. I just wanted to close with this slide that points out the importance of knowing our limits and where to focus. We have to recognize there's a demand side and a cost side to business, and the things that the public sector can influence are relatively limited, especially on a local level. And municipalities often focus on infrastructure and critical services. They often look at things like the development potential of land and the intensity of uses that are allowed on land. They, to some degree, get involved with incentives. To a lesser degree, get involved with education and training, but that's a critical piece. The labor force, I think on the radio, just hearing it earlier today or yesterday. And sometimes promotions or marketing and branding. Less under the public realm or the idea of talking about building markets for products, although that's changing a little bit. Capital, unless we're talking about things where the town applies for a grant and then we turn around and loan money, and we're not directly controlling labor supply or wages. Next steps, talk about it. Will this be something strategic or tactical, or you can come up with different ways of discussing this, and I know at least one member has a different nomenclature, and you could look at targeting blight, creating committees, you could do research, coordinate with other organizations that are doing this, because other communities are doing it and have been doing it.
Okay. Joe, you got a?
Yeah, well, I think that was an excellent presentation by Dean, and I think hopefully got us kicked off in the right direction. And Dean's analogy of just the purpose here was for Dean to stir the pot and to get out from the select board more of what you had in mind over the next 10, 12 months, and obviously onto the future. And let's get going.
Well, this agenda item is titled an introduction. It's not a decision item. I think we clearly had an introduction, but why don't we turn it over to the other select board members to see who has thoughts on an introduction, and then how we might consider future things.
Yeah, I really value your presentation, Dean. It's very thoughtful. You frame the initiative in terms of focuses of activity. It might be as useful to frame it in terms of organization. Economic development at the local level can take a conventional institutional form. sometimes referred to as a one-stop shop, and frequently involving staff and some appreciable level of resources. Or it can take an opportunistic form, in which case you would tactically as well as strategically target opportunities as they arise. One example of which, and I have experience with both forms, is an approach to the town by a private organization, of which there are a number nationally, who represents a potential manufacturing or industrial or business client who might be interested in locating to the town. If the town is unprepared to provide the information, to appear knowledgeable about the desirability of that industry, or what incentives, as you point out, it might be able to provide, even in a limited form, that very often is disadvantageous to the community. My sense is that we should, and I would recommend to my fellow members and to Joe, that at our next meeting, we consider establishing an economic development working group of a membership perhaps of 9, appoint 3 persons that same night as an organizing committee, charge them with the responsibility to return to the board with an action plan, and at the same time, nominations for the remaining positions on the working group, and that we take the step to move forward on what I believe is a very critical initiative for the town.
Anyone else like to weigh in?
So I guess I would just add to what Jerry said, that, you know, we have the somewhat unique opportunity as we embark on Form-Based Code 2.0 to weave some of this in, to maybe do some marketing, that type of thing. You know, there's always talk about people looking for space outside of Burlington, and that's commercial space or residential space, that type of thing. So I think there's some impetus for us to get things ready, if you will, for people to look at and move to at some point in time. So I think that, you know, kind of everything's kind of lining up here a little bit to do some of that. I think one of the obvious is targeting the blight. You know, I think we should have a chat with some of the properties along Route 7 and see if we can help them improve what they have, or at least understand what their long-term usage is here, so that we can kind of weave that into some kind of a plan. Because, you know, when you see that kind of thing as you're driving, you know, and if you just look at the numbers of cars, people are wondering what's going on. Why is this sitting, you know, dormant for so long? So I think, you know, and I won't pretend sitting here that I know what some of these situations are, but I'd really like to know, to see if there's anything the town can do to help, so.
Thanks, John. Colleen?
So, just to bounce off from what John said, and like I echo that, like I think all of us here can recognize where there's a blighted area and where we'd like to see some healthy economic growth that we haven't seen in over a decade. Even though I can recognize that it's a problem, I really have no idea how to fix or correct the problem. And I like the idea of an economic development committee, just having especially local business owners weigh in and contribute. But at the same time, they're not experts in how to redevelop an area and to make it more enticing. They can offer their personal opinion, and that's valuable, but I feel like other communities and towns, and the example I'm going to use is Burlington, they hired an economic development consultant to at least help outline a plan to begin with. And, you know, volunteers are volunteers. Like, they have valuable things to add, but doesn't mean that they really have the expertise necessary. And I feel like this is we're all trying and we all recognize that it's a problem. I feel like we just need to take that next step and be leaders and move in a direction that's actually going to result in something, in a deliverable.
Josh, do you have any?
Yeah, I think these are all really good ideas, and I think it sort of helps us move along. I'm not sure if where to fit all of them into Dean's high level. Are these strategic or these tactical answers? And so I think there may be some value in sort of approach, starting at that approach as well, and sort of say, where do these things fit, and how can we move forward on within that framework?
Thank you. Let me give a little history. We've had an economic development committee in Shelburne before. We had one years ago, and it didn't work out. Some of my concerns are staff time. I don't want to overburden staff. I mean, I want to balance this also. I couldn't agree more with, I think everybody here realizes we have, Route 7's in terrible shape for our business community. It's bad. At one time, the select board about 4 years ago counted how many empty storefronts we had, and we had 22 on Route 7. And it's not getting better. So perhaps a committee is something to consider, but before I'm ready to say, yeah, let's get a committee, let alone a committee with 9 members, frankly, I'd like to know what's staff's recommendations. They're the ones working every day on this kind of thing. What do they see? Maybe you, Joe, will say, yeah, an economic development committee, I would recommend that to the select board, but I would like to give you time to speak to the people who work for you, to come back to the board to say, yeah, this is something we want to do. And if you come back and say, yeah, this is something we want to do, then I'm going to support it. But I just don't want to say, yeah, I want to do this committee, and then I want this staff member assigned to it. I want your input on it. And this also leads us to the question of, do we have a paid economic development officer? Which is something that during one of the town plan iterations that was problematic when it reached the select board at one time in the past, there was this officer included. It said the town shall hire an economic development officer, and I thought that was improper that it was placed in the town plan and hidden, actually, not even brought to our attention at that time. I think that's an item of big significance that should be discussed and debated and sought for residents' input. So I might be leaning towards a committee, but I would like to get staff input first to see what their thoughts are. How does this impact our going through the town plan? We just talked about that earlier tonight. And we have an economic development portion in the town plan. Would an economic committee, how would that fit together? And I think it would just make sense to get some input from staff before we jumped into forming a committee. I'd be in favor of putting something on the next available agenda to discuss it, and if it leads us to a committee, yeah, then we go forward with a committee. But before I was going to embrace 9 people on a committee, I certainly would like to know, why are we going to go with 9? And knowing you, Jerry, I know there's a logical reason.
Which I'll be happy to.
I just think we need staff
In fact,
input
I'd like
first.
to comment in a number of ways. First, Colleen, you make a very good point. I think we will discover that there is an enormous amount of material about economic development. There are county and state organizations and agencies who provide not only material but consultant advice. I don't believe, and it's not been my experience, that at the very early stages of determining just what you would want in a community economic development initiative, that you might be necessarily reliant on consultant help. Second, I certainly don't anticipate or imagine this effort to involve paid staff at any near future time. that tilts the organization toward what I've called opportunistic. And I'll repeat again for my colleagues' benefit that initiatives come both as tactical and strategic, and sometimes at the same time. So Dean and I may have a friendly disagreement about how useful that dichotomy really is. But my expectation is that a working group is that. It does not rise to committee status. It does not demand of staff, I don't think, extraordinary efforts, although it wouldn't happen without Joe and Dean, clearly. But I think the opportunity is to start a process with a small group which spends its time discussing the very questions that Dean has raised and others like it, and comes back to the board on a regular basis with ideas about in what direction might this be most useful and appropriate for Shelburne. In advance of budget, should there be budget considerations, that would be certainly one time target, but more importantly, to mobilize what I think are considerable resources in this town, in capital formation, in branding, in the creative economy, in real estate development. We have in this community an extraordinary resource that this working group could tap. So I urge my fellow members to give this positive consideration at the next meeting, and that we have it as a decision item and not something for further discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry. Anyone else here have any comments? Anyone else here like to add anything? Joe, you got something?
Yeah, I think it'd just maybe be important in the next week or two, Jerry, if we can get together, and I think it's probably not realistic to think that staff would not have any involvement here. I think there'd be a lot. I mean, there's guys like Chris Robinson, quite frankly, maybe the department that has the most impact, or the most impact on economic development is sewer capacity, and how are you gonna go about dealing with that. So I think it's going to be important for us to figure out if there's going to be a committee at this stage, what exactly are they going to do, and really narrow the focus potentially. So I guess I'm a little bit more, I'm with you, Gary. I think it's a reasonable idea. I just think it needs to be fleshed out a little bit more of what we're agreeing to.
And just let me clarify, I'm very supportive of your suggestion.
Good.
Okay, so I just want to clear that up. I just am also very supportive of giving staff the opportunity to think about how is this going to impact us and come back. And so that's why I'm not in favor of saying, putting this on as a decision item for the next meeting, unless staff can come back and tell us in a way, hey, we're ready to go forward. So why don't we see how they react, and we'll go from there.
Good.
Okay, is that good clarification?
Yep. Thank you.
Sure. All right, next item
Thanks.
is
Oh.
number 13, presentation on the results of the townwide library project survey. And Colleen, you want to jump in on this, or?
Just to review, I'm going to quickly turn this over to Laura, but just to review, this is the next step that was asked by the Select Board of the Library Steering Committee, was really to assess in the most objective manner possible what the community support would be for a library center project. And so we took that next step, and Laura can take it from here and introduce Mr., or unless you wanted to say
I
something.
was just going to say one thing, that we purposefully designed this presentation not to be a decision item, and that a decision item would be probably a month from now, so everyone can kind of relax, and you're going to be getting this information for the first time. Maybe you looked at it on Friday. You're not forced to make a decision here, and there's time to give any input, whether it's from the select board or from public. So I just hope everyone can kind of relax and just take the information for what it is tonight, and that this is an organized. Was it?
Cool our jets.
Yeah, and just that this is an organized process to get us to a point where we can make a comfortable decision a month from now. So, thanks, Laura.
For having us on your agenda this evening. We're really excited to give you an update. It's been a while since you've heard from us. I do need to open a concurrent meeting because we do have enough of the steering committee here, and we're conducting official business, so I'll call us to order. I think most of what I was going to say has been said, so that's great. You guys did ask us to sort of test the waters of the community for public financing, potential public financing support for a project of this size. And so we hired Mr. Mosier to help us carefully design a survey that would go out to all registered voters and figure out how to create that survey, how to conduct it, and how to analyze it in a way that would give us helpful information. So that being said, I think we're still transitioning over equipment here, but would you like to get started before we get everything? No. Okay. A joke? I don't have any good jokes, I'm sorry.
One piece of news is that of the 5,000 or so registered voters, it was 1,200 or 1,300 responded. I think we were gonna, on a good day, thinking maybe 300 or 400 were gonna respond. So we were thrilled as a steering committee, and Michael was probably overwhelmed with his inbox to go through 1,400 survey responses. So that alone gives you an idea of that, people are paying attention, that they're interested in the community.
22%
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Boy, that is amazing. Gee.
We were thrilled that people took it so seriously, that people responded, that we got a lot of comments, and gave us a lot of insight in terms of how much people had heard about the project and how much more publicity and answering of questions we need to do moving forward, because there is still a lot of misunderstanding about the size of the project, what it's doing, particularly the fact that it isn't just a library project. I think there's still a lot of misunderstanding around that. People being very surprised that we would want to build a library for the entire project cost, and so it was clear that they thought the entire project cost was going just to the library, even though we had tried to make it clear that wasn't the case. So we definitely need to do some more work on that. All right.
Thanks. I've got my hands full now. Sorry. Thank you. No, that's perfect. That's good. Thank you. Let's see.
Welcome, Michael.
Thank you very much for having me. Please, thank you. Okay, there it is. So this is just really a brief synopsis of the data, the methodology that we used, some of the results and what that means, and just, mostly going to be some Q&A, I suppose. So to begin with, basic background, there have been some ongoing space and maintenance issues at the Pearson Library and the Historic Town Hall. There are some challenges here in the municipal space with parking, pedestrian, and traffic challenges on the campus here. It's been 2 years or more of public process and project scoping to develop a clear set of options to address these challenges altogether or separately, as you'll see in a moment, or as I'm sure you're aware already. And so this survey is really simply a continuation of ongoing information gathering and public participation throughout a process that's been ongoing for several years. The methodology that we utilized was basically we drafted up, the municipality hired me to come in and assist with the drafting of a survey instrument, informational materials to go out to the community. I have 15 or so years doing this type of work. I work at a place called the Center for Rural Studies at University of Vermont. We do data collection with municipalities and nonprofit organizations, state agencies. I'm doing this as a project aside from that professional role. And was happy to help and engage in this. I think it's an interesting survey. And I was able to assist in the development of the informational letter and the survey instrument to ensure that certain missteps weren't made. Common missteps include, in survey design is things like leading language, using language that is overly descriptive or leading people to a certain conclusion that they might want to respond in a certain way. So part of my job was to make sure that those types of things weren't happening, and to also advise on the methodology for mail out and ensure that the survey was representative to a population in the town of Shelburne. So after several rounds of working through development of this informational letter and the survey instrument, which was reviewed by the library, the committee, the steering committee, and myself, we ended up mailing out right after town meeting to approximately 5,500 registered Shelburne voters in town, and did receive what I would consider to be a fairly incredible response rate. 22% with a mail survey is, especially in this day and age, even 10 years ago, that was never possible. Nowadays, with something sent in the mail, you're lucky to get 5%. 10% is what you aim for. 22% is incredible for a response rate from registered voters in the town of Shelburne. That response rate and really leads this project to have a very high, be very highly representative to the community as a whole. We use statistical language to say that this type of response rate has a 99% confidence level with a 3.3% margin of error. What that means in lay terms, the easiest way to describe it is that if this survey were to be conducted 100 times, 99 of those times, any of the results would be within that, plus or minus 3.3 margin of error. So that's really great. It's probably I think it's the highest confidence level and margin of error I've seen for any of the work that I've done in the past. So I'll start with demographics. I assume you've all seen a version of the survey instrument. Really basic, really straightforward. I didn't want to put it up on a slide because you wouldn't be able to read it anyway, but I do have a copy here if anyone would like to see it. We started with, we didn't start with the demographics, those were later on in the survey, but I thought it'd make sense to start with them here tonight. So property owners and renters, all the demographics have been compared to American Community Survey data as well, the most recent data that's available for the town of Shelburne, just so you have an idea of how close we were to the true population demographics, to ensure that, again, it's sort of triangulating to make sure that you really are representative of the community in your results. So again, Shelburne our respondents, we had nearly 85% describe themselves as property owners. That is higher than the town of Shelburne population demographic of about 77%. Again, there's margins of error involved in the American Community Survey data, so which might be plus or minus 5% with the actual Shelburne town demographic there, but irregardless, they're fairly close to each other. They're not way off, and ownership and renter rates may not play into this. Well, I guess they would, because we're talking about property owners that pay taxes versus renters who don't directly pay taxes. Another question we asked was, whether or not there are children in the household. Again, this metric fairly close to the town demographic, American Community Survey demographic. 73% of respondents said they had no children in the home, and that compares to about 68% of folks across town that do not have children under 18 in the home. And sort of getting into a little bit more detail, looking at specific age groups, we can sort of see that the respondents were, well, first of all, no one under 18 would have been reached by this survey because it was registered voters. So the calculations are based upon the 18 and above population for the Shelburne Town demographic data. And you can see that there's a little bit of underrepresentation in some of the younger age groups in this survey, and that as you get into some of the older age groups, there tends to be a little bit more overrepresentation. Again, the margins of error, I would say the differences between the respondents and the actual demographics fit within the margins of error in many of these cases. So basically, there's really a negligible difference between the two. Income levels, on the left-hand side there, we have respondents. And I think we can kind of see the color coding there. So the household incomes less than $50,000 are at the bottom, and the highest income bracket is at the top. And you see here again, the respondent demographics and Shelburne Town demographics, they're really not that far off. There's no like noticeable skew anywhere. You know, there's obviously going to be some places where they're a little bit off, but nothing that's terribly drastic. You know, maybe 8 points is the greatest spread. So that's not bad at all. And this is this was actually the first question that was asked in the survey. Have you heard of the Pearson Library Project? 83% of respondents said they had. This was previous to the informational letter and receiving the survey. And, you know, I think that's great. I think that's a testament to the work that's been done in the community on outreach and communicating, you know, the need to address some of these challenges and the work that's been ongoing, the public process that's already been taking place over time. So, I mean, really, the survey is very straightforward, very basic, a couple simple questions. First monetary question that was asked, would you vote to approve this this bond to fully address the Pearson Library maintenance and space issues and the restoration of the historic town hall and to improve parking, pedestrian access, and traffic flow? This question came right after a brief description of actually, the question included a brief description of what the tax increase impact would be per $100,000 of assessed property value. So we felt that it was important to sort of give people an idea of what they were actually voting for by thinking about their property ownership and what the impact to their personal property taxes would be. Again, trying to be very transparent and very clear with the public about what we're talking about, what we're asking them about. And so that was included information. And as you can see, 57% of respondents said that they would vote for this $6.5 million bond. And they said that knowing that there'd be a $33.85 increase to their property taxes for every $100,000 of assessed property value. We went on to ask a secondary question, and again, I believe it was very clearly delineated that this lower amount was addressing fewer aspects of the total project description, and we were very careful to delineate the differences between the two options in the informational letter as well as in the survey itself. And so there was, again, information about the impact to property taxes per assessed value, and 63% of respondents stated that they would support this level as well. Respondents were able to, you know, respond to both questions, either yes or no on both. a lot of folks, actually, some of the comments that we read were that folks voted no on this option because they really wanted the other option. And so there was a little bit of a mixed bag on that. This number might have been a little bit higher, to be honest, because of that. So that's it. I'm happy to answer any questions. There was a space for folks to write in their comments, and there's a separate report that I've put together, separate from this PowerPoint presentation, where there's a little bit more depth. There's some cross-tabulations where we're looking at some of the demographics and how they impacted their response rate for, or support for these different bond levels. You can get into that if you want. I didn't want to go into that tonight because, well, it's after 9. And the open response questions, what we did is we tried to capture substantive comments from folks that we thought would be of interest, that we captured for the reporting process. But tonight I've also brought back all of those surveys. They're in a box over in the library, and the full text of all of those is available to anyone that is willing to dig through the stack of paperwork. But you know, we weren't going to write down comments like, yes, I support the 6.5 bond rate, after they had already said that on the other side. So there's a lot of stuff that we could eliminate, and but there's also a lot of really good stuff, context provided in some of those comments. So that's all I have, unless we want to go into cross tabulations or something like that.
Michael, thank you very much. For
Yep.
the people who put this together, I want to thank everybody for getting a professional to make sure we have a survey that's presented in a way that has greater credibility than if some amateurs put it together. I know I originally had one comment, but I recognize that I'm an amateur and Michael is a professional, so I defer to his expertise over mine on this. And anybody on the board have any comments? It's not a decision item tonight. It's the presentation of the survey. I think it provides a lot of useful information for us. Does anybody want to say anything?
Just one question. On a survey like this, is there any sense from your experience about people who would respond, whether they were more inclined or less inclined for the project? You know,
Yeah.
Does that influence?
Yeah, I know what you're saying. And I'm sorry, I neglected to mention that part of the methodology was the provision of 3 $100 gift certificates to folks who responded within a period of time. And I really encouraged that type of incentive because it helps reduce response bias that you're talking about right there. It gets people to, you know, fill the thing out regardless of how they feel about the Pearson Library project or the campus parking or whatever it is. They, you know, they're also interested for another reason, and so that does help. You know, you could.
Who got the certificates?
Well,
I'm kidding, man.
we do have. There were 3. Yeah, they've been distributed, right? Yeah, someone did. I don't
We
recall.
did put it in the paper, but I can't remember their names.
Oh, okay. So nothing else from anyone on the board? Anything from anyone here about the survey? Oh, did you have something, Jerry?
Yeah, there's some really interesting pieces of information here. I'm really interested that the older population could be imagined to be quite supportive.
Yeah.
Which runs to the notion of intergenerational library use. You know, that's an intriguing idea, that where you might have felt a younger population with school-aged kids, were they unfortunately to have the time and opportunity and could have responded in greater numbers, would be, you know, greatly supportive, given the use of the availability of the library for kids. But that's to me, that's a very interesting finding. Would you consider this definitive?
I would consider.
I don't mean that as a trick question, but
Yeah, I
just in
know.
your experience.
I would say that the sheer volume of responses itself is definitive.
Yeah,
I've never seen a response like that.
Yeah.
You know, in the past, I've worked in towns this size and, you know, tried to get 400 responses.
Yeah,
and
sure.
struggled. And so to have almost 1,200, I mean, actually, more than that, I had to cut it off.
Yeah.
So that was kind of incredible to me. And you said that the use rate here at the library is, what's that rate? Something incredibly high.
Yeah, so the number of card holders in town is extraordinarily high for a public library. We regularly weed our card holders so people aren't just sort of dead weight because we get charged some of our fees by how many card holders we have. So a good number of card holders for your population is about 40%. That's really good, and we're at 70.
So there's something going on in this town, and from what I heard earlier, it might be partly due to you. But there's something going on in this town. The library usage is incredible, and the awareness of the library, and you know, across the demographics, it's all present in the data and the levels of support. So I feel that it's a very strong response from the community.
Thank you.
I'd be interested, Colleen, as a steering committee member, what your reactions were and.
Oh, well, I think that I was definitely encouraged. Like I said earlier about the Bay Road path is my biggest priority when trying to determine a project is if there's community support. And, you know, we've had a number of opportunities. This isn't just one and the deciding factor. Like, we've had a number of points along the way at which we've done gut checks, and whether it's charrettes and camping out at the farmer's market and talking to people within the town, and then we had a very informal, you know, inexperienced type of survey that we did at the voting offices in November, and we've done this all along the way to make sure that we're still where we feel the town wants us to be, and that there's actually still a purpose for us to be continuing with this project. Like, we know that as a select board, and the library board of trustees knows, that we need to do something with the library building and the town hall. And it was always about which kind of direction will the town support. And it's very, very clear that the town of Shelburne definitely supports us going forward with something that's going to not just meet our needs now, but to meet our needs for the next 20 years and show that we have that forethought. And this isn't just a poorly planned, do it as cheap as possible because that's all we're going to do, because that's all the town will support. This town has, I think, stated that it really wants something more.
Thank you, Colleen. Anyone else have anything before we move on? Joe?
I just want to say that, you know, over the last year, starting last year about this time, both the select board and the trustees made this project a priority. And before this year, there was years of work done by a lot of people, but this year in particular, I mean, I think that there was a tremendous amount of work done to bring it to a point now, which I think that as policymakers, in terms of deciding whether or not this is going to go on, what option might go on a bond ballot, or if any, I think that you've been at least presented with an honest to goodness effort over the last year. Laura's, I think, given a few pints of blood to this project, literally, to bring it to this position. And I definitely want to thank Laura for a tremendous amount of work over the last 12 months in particular on this project, not to mention all the years before. But, you know, I think that we did really put an honest effort into making this a priority and to bring it to at least a place that we can make a decision. And I guess I'll encourage the select board to talk to the members of the community and the trustees over the next month so you can be prepared to make a decision in June on where we're going to go.
The one thing I think is important about putting this, whether the select board decides to put this on a bond vote is to provide the community with plenty of notice that it will be discussed, to include information, I would think, from the steering committee to the Shelburne News. And the timing of the bond is also critical, whether it's November or March. And to make it clear, it is out of the ordinary for municipalities to have bond votes in November if there's nothing else on. That happened with the school bond, and I just let people know it's an interesting thing, the timing of the bond, because there's very well could be other things. For example, we spoke earlier today about the La Platte River Bridge. Well, if that's a $3 million bond also, and the library comes on in November, people might not know that that there could be a prioritization issue also that comes up. And to be fair, it is something to be concerned of.
Yep.
Thank you for the presentation. The results certainly encouraging for a library. And Michael, thank you very much. I know you sat here a long time tonight. Go have a beer. There's a guy in the back who makes great beer.
Thank you.
And I'll call the steering committee meeting to close.
Thanks, Laura.
Thanks. Our next item is for Matt in the back. Consider updating sewer billing policy for industrial users. Fiddlehead Brewery request. I broke the first growler that you ever made. I broke the first one.
So real quick, to tee it up, when this request came in originally, I'll just be honest with the board, I think Chris and Peter and I spoke, and we're kind of kicking around, whether or not we thought this was within staff's authority to approve this, or if it should be kicked up to the commissioners. I think it was one of those things, well, if we have to think about it for 30 seconds or longer, we probably should do boots and suspenders and put this before the select board / sewer commissioners. So that's why it is in front of you. This would be a departure from the norm. So I think anytime we're looking at doing a departure from the norm, it's good to have the policy board weigh in on it. And maybe Chris is the best person to explain this diagram and what makes Fiddlehead unique relative to any other facility in Shelburne, and why this proposal is before you.
Good evening. So typical residential and commercial properties are usually billed based off just the water meter reading. And in this case, we have a couple things going on. One is we have a water meter reading of what goes into the building for water. And then it gets broken into two separate types of processes. There's an actual brewing process, which uses the majority of the water that's being brought into the building. And out of that brewing process, you have a couple different streams that leave it. One is what leaves the brewing process and goes through the pretreatment system and gets discharged to us. But there's also a lot of water that is removed from the system that doesn't go down the drain to us, such as the evaporation, the high-strength waste, and the actual beer that's produced, what goes out in the bottles and the kegs and so forth. So Matt approached me and said, hey, why can't we just bill from what's being sent to you into the town system from the brewery? And because it is measured, they have a pre-treatment system. They're required to have a flow meter that's calibrated. Right now, I think it's once a week, but it eventually may change to once a month. But that's all ran by their state permit requirements. And this is not out of the ordinary. A lot of other breweries bill off from what's being discharged out. The only caveat to that was that we weren't picking up what's being used in the sanitary side of things, which still has to be accounted for. The restrooms, the sinks, the showers, things like that that are inside the building. So we battled that. We thought about that, trying to figure out, how are we going to capture that. And we've, I think, come to a pretty good resolution, and that's basically to install a water meter in the building that serves the sanitary side of things. The way the building is actually built, the brewery process is on one end of the building, and the water for the sanitary side is on the other end of the building. So I think there's a pretty good chance that there's a dedicated water line that runs down that way that we could put a meter on, and we would read that meter, and that meter would be included in the gallons per day or the total gallons per quarter that are being discharged to us. So basically, there would be a water meter reading that would pay the bill for the total water going into the building. But as far as the wastewater is concerned, we would take the new installed water meter that's serving the sanitary side and also the measured flow that's being sent through their pre-treatment system and delivered to us. So it would be a combination of those two readings combined. So
Thank
that's
you, Chris. I think you prepared a proposed motion to address this, and Matt brought samples for all of us, I think, right?
And just, we did talk internally, I mean, anytime we do something different, there is a little bit of extra step that Peter's office needs to take into account. I don't think we have a software that just would do this automatically. So we did talk about it. I think Peter feels like that his office can handle this. So at least as a staff, the motion I circled here is one that we can support. I think this is what Matt was expecting to, or
Yeah.
hoping for.
So you guys worked together, reached something that made sense for everyone, and the town's comfortable, and the brewery's comfortable with.
Yeah, for 5.5 years, we've been charged for everything that's been going out in kegs and cans, so I would really like to reach some type of an agreement because this has been going on for a long time, and the amount that we're discharging now is quite high, and we've invested very heavily. I mean, we really love being part of the town of Shelburne, and it was absolutely important when I made the next step for growth in my business that it happened in Shelburne.
Good.
That put me at a huge economic disadvantage to other breweries in Burlington, for instance, and other neighboring towns that had the sewer system to support it. So we put in a waste treatment system to the tune of about $500,000, and it's doing a fantastic job. Last time I came before the select board, I asked for 100 pounds a day of BOD discharge. Currently, our average is 0.2 pounds a day. So we're putting out less than or equivalent to a household. So, we've really gone out of our way to do our part. I'm happy to do it, but I would hope that we can reach some type
I
of.
remember that was a big concern before the board.
Yes.
Years ago, about 5 years ago,
Yeah.
whenever you came before us.
And I also want to say that Chris reached out to other municipalities, like Middlebury, South Burlington, Burlington, that have breweries, and some do what we're recommending to the commissioners, and some aren't as nice as this. But there is a precedent to do what we're asking you to consider.
Great, I'd love to entertain a motion on this.
Can we ask a question?
Sure.
Either Joe or Chris, whomever wants to respond. Is it fair to say that there's no chance of wide precedent being set here because of the unique characteristic of the required
I
permitting?
would say no, I don't believe so, because if we had another brewery come in, of
Yeah,
course, there might be something. But other than that, no, because I think the unique thing about this is that they do have a pre-treatment permit that is actually treating their waste and it's being measured, and that's a requirement through the state. So you may get a pre-treater that comes in the future that we might have to consider, but.
Peter's going to.
But Jerry, I shared your concern actually in looking at this, because right now, all of our charges for water and wastewater are going through Shelburne meters. If a customer doesn't have a meter, then they are charged a flat 18,000 gallons a quarter for residential or commercial. I think, and we do get complaints from people saying, well, okay, you're basing my sewer bill on how much water I use, but all that water didn't go down the sewer. So I was concerned that you could have someone coming in with their own metering system and saying, here's my meter, and it's measuring the sewer coming out. I think the case with Fiddlehead that allows me to say I think this is a one-of-a-kind situation is the amount of regulation that Matt has to go through on that metering equipment. It's not just something that he's manufactured on his own and plugged into his sewer line. He has to meet state regulatory requirements and everything else with that equipment. So it's got to be accurate, or his permits and everything else can be issues. So on that basis, I don't think that it's something that any other customer could come in unless they have an equivalent way of measuring it accurately. So that, I think, satisfied my concern primarily with this type of arrangement.
Thanks for bringing
Thanks,
that up.
Peter. Yeah.
On residential, just to go back to that, don't you give credit, or aren't credits given for like pools and backyard ice rinks and things like that anyway?
There
So there
and
is something like that.
And there again, the person is using the Shelburne water meter to determine that credit. They're not just, calculating it on
Right.
their own. So they would tell us if they had a leak or had a pool fill or ice rink fill. We'd ask them to read your meter before you fill it. Afterwards, tell us what the gallons are. We double check that with their quarterly billing. If the credit is bigger than their quarterly bill, then there's something wrong, obviously. So, but we do that reality check in those cases.
Do you have a ballpark estimate of what that reduction might be, look like in the future?
I do, actually. This past quarter, their water bill itself was 332,000 gallons. And my guesstimate is in beer, I guess it would be, they had 156,000 gallons in the pre-treatment that went out. Of course, we can't measure what was in the, we can't measure what was on the sanitary side. What goes out in the pre-treatment, I mean, ideally, you'd be able to say, okay, what went out in the pre-treatment, if you took the total value of the 332,000 gallons minus the 155,000 gallons, and then what he has in storage for beer, whatever that difference would be the sanitary side. Well, it equates to, almost 200,000 gallons in a quarter. That doesn't make sense. So there's evaporation that's happening. There's high-strength waste that's leaving the building and stuff. So I think using the metering system that we're proposing, we don't have to worry about tracking all those small side stream things.
Great, thanks. Would someone like to make a motion?
So moved.
Move to charge Fiddlehead Brewery sewer usage and beer production to be based on the sewer discharge meter owned and maintained by Fiddlehead, and the sanitary wastewater by installation of an additional Shelburne water meter serving the restroom, et cetera, as recommended by wastewater superintendent Chris Robinson. That was your motion, right?
Yes, it was.
Moved by Jerry, seconded by
Word for word.
Josh. Sorry. Okay, good. Any further discussion? Who thinks he should bring beer, though? Just saying. All in favor? Aye. Thank you, Matt. Thanks for staying in Shelburne. You really, everybody knows Fiddlehead. The lines in front of your building, when you, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, so thank you for having us.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, next item. Update from the town manager on the regional emergency dispatching.
I'll do this in 30 seconds or less. The Joint Survey Committee has met at least 3 times. I would predict that within 2 months, we'll have a draft charter to show the various legislative bodies, the city councils, select boards, all the minutes of the work of this Joint Survey Committee are online through the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission. And also just want to add that I personally have visited, besides Shelburne, 4 or 5 other select boards in Chittenden County to give kind of the presentation that Charlie and Kevin Dorn did for Shelburne. And I think Charlie has done that presentation to every single Chittenden County community. So the word's been out. We're working full speed ahead. And like I said, I'm going to guess that within 2 months we'll have a draft charter to show you.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
All right, anybody have any comments or anything? Next item. first draft presentation of the fiscal year 2018 wastewater budget. Are you going to do that, Chris, in
I think
45?
Peter's gonna
Peter?
kick it off. Yeah, and just a reminder.
2 minutes?
Presentation, I'll be here to answer questions.
Yeah, so just a reminder, this is the first draft budget presentation, again, like the library survey. No pressure here. We got a little bit of time before the end of June, when the budget needs to be adopted and corresponding rates approved. So this is a first step, and Peter will give the initial presentation, and Chris is here to answer any technical questions.
Given the hour, I'm going to trim back on some of these slides and just try to focus on the budget itself. So the budget draft that we provided with you in your select board packet and is posted online for the new budget starting July 1st. Total expenses in this draft are $1.9 million. That's a 2.4% increase from the current budget. Total volumes billed. One of the trends that we're seeing, and I'll show it in one of the graphs, is that our total volumes billed has been going up. In the past, that had been steady or declining or at least unpredictable. So there seems to be a trend there where we've gone a little bit more volumes on an upward basis. The proposed rate that we're looking at in this version, again, it's not final, but just for discussion at this point, would be a 2.6% increase, and the impact on the typical residential user of a two-person, one or two-person family or a family of four would be that range in the fee. In terms of where our expenses are, it's no surprise, our biggest expense in the budget is the debt service, primarily on the rehab of the plants that we did back around 2000, but also some of the other projects that Chris has done, collection system improvements, pump station rehabs, and things like that since then. Salaries and benefits typically are another large part of the budget. Operating and maintenance expense, just the normal ongoing operations, maintaining the equipment, purchasing replacement pumps and things like that, because the plant obviously operates under very severe, or both plants operate under severe conditions 24/7 in a very damp, kind of difficult environment. Utilities, our biggest cost there is electricity, and that's something that Chris has been working on to try to minimize the electric load. But again, that's a big part of the budget as well. The expense decreases in this budget compared to the one that we're operating under today. The SCADA system maintenance, there was some equipment that was replaced this year. That's a $10,000 reduction because that replacement has taken place. It won't have to happen next year. It'll be good for probably 3 or 4 years anyway before another upgrade needs to be done. Pump station maintenance, down $15,000. Again, Chris and his staff have been working on kind of a rotating basis to upgrade some of our pump stations. They've become more reliable, use less electricity. So again, we're kind of seeing the benefits of that with a reduction in the ongoing maintenance there. Sludge disposal, I talked about that earlier from Chittenden Solid Waste. That's obviously impacted by the rates they charge us. But I think I would want to give credit, hopefully Chris would agree, to one of our operators, Jeff Pillsbury, who really has taken on that project of operating the centrifuge, which does the dewatering, but not only that, but the chemicals that go into it. So the sludge product, which is kind of a weird thing to be talking about, but it goes out as good a quality as possible for Chittenden Solid Waste to give us the best possible rate. So a lot of work there in terms of making sure that that's operated as efficiently as possible. Again, with the centrifuge that the staff literally had to rebuild on its own because the equipment was out of service and isn't manufactured anymore. It would have been much more expensive to replace it with a brand new centrifuge, and knock on wood, the replacement that was done is working well. Debt payments down about $9,400. That was because of an error the state made in one of the state loans that we'd been paying, but we were double charged for one of the components of that. They've corrected that. So actually our debt payments as projected combined all together are down a little bit from this year. Capital projects that we're looking at for the new budget year, again talking about the rotation of the rehabs of the pump stations. We're looking at rehabbing the Bay Colony pump station for about $50,000 and continuing to put money aside into a capital improvement fund, not for the large bond projects that we're talking about, but some of the other pumps and things that need to be replaced on an ongoing basis. So the sort of the medium types of size capital projects. Operating expense increases, chemicals up $6,000. Most of that is because of unit price increases of the chemicals that Chris and his staff are buying, but also some of the chemicals used in the sludge process. Well, a little bit of an increase there, but again, to see the savings that we had on the sludge disposal as a result of that. Property casualty insurance, we saw that with the general fund also. Our rates with the League of Cities and Towns have been going up for liability and property insurance, so that's impacting it. Professional services, I think we talked about that last year where Chris has a couple of projects going, an asset management software system where he can plan out the replacement of equipment. And if you've gone through the plants, you know there's a lot of pumps and controls and all the components that make both plants run properly. Well, we'd like to have a plan so that you're not having to be reactive when something breaks. You have to go and replace it all of a sudden, but trying to have a schedule where that equipment is being replaced so that you're not subject to unexpected large increases because of something failing unexpectedly. Also, we talked about in last year's budget a plant consolidation study. One of the biggest factors of our high rates is the fact that we have 2 treatment plants and a largely residential load that those costs get spread over. So the question is, well, would it make more sense to consolidate both plants into one? That would save on operating costs, potentially avoid staffing increases as well. That's something that's been talked about, and Chris will be working with some consultants to move that project ahead in the new budget year coming up. And salaries and benefits, cost of living, as well as looking at the organizational structure that was part of the budget process with the town budget as well. And that's, we're proposing in this version, we have what I would call phase 1 of that. Currently, we do have 5 full-time staff members. We're not proposing to increase that, although the long-range plan that was developed around budget time several months ago was to add another person to the staff. But what we're looking at for this first go-around would be to basically retitle some of the positions. And right now, we have Chris, obviously, as the superintendent, managing both the sewer as well as the stormwater. But currently we have 1 chief operator, Steve Williams, and we're proposing to have 2 chief operators, 1 for each plant, both with a lot of experience and are certified in that, as well as the other 2 employees who are doing a great job. But one, Chris Eustace, is really the go-to guy that manages our pump stations. And to sort of change his title from just basically operator to chief mechanic, and he would be responsible for managing the pump stations as well as some of the major equipment in the treatment areas. And then our operator, Jeff Pillsbury, continuing to basically do the other duties, filling in with those other areas. So that's the staffing piece that we're looking at. And just briefly, in terms of the other piece of the budget, obviously is not only what's the budget in dollars, but how many gallons are we dividing that over? Because our rate is basically the budget divided by the number of gallons we're expecting to be treating or billing through the year. And as I said earlier, the trend has kind of been up in terms of the gallons. You can see in the past it was kind of up and down, but I think it's really showing particularly projects like the Shelburne Green project, the MPC project, meatpacking facility on Executive Drive, as well as Harrington Village. Our sales have been going up, so that's good in the sense that it's giving us more gallons to spread our costs over to try to limit the rate increases. So this version, I'm a little cautious to continue the trend going up because we've gotten burned in that in the past. Looks like it's going up, oops, then it went down. And again, with potentially the impact of Fiddlehead with the new rate that we're looking at there, the new billing procedure. So we're a little conservative in terms of what we're projecting for gallons for the new year that we would be spreading those costs over, but that's what we have in the current budget. So with that, I guess if there's any questions, obviously there's a lot more line items in the budget than that, but that's just a summary of where we're at this point.
Thanks, Peter. This is the first draft. Anybody have any questions? Great. Thank you very much. Oh, Gail.
One question. Is there anything built into your budget in terms of avoid the kind of overflow and problem that happened just a few weeks ago?
No. The overflow that happened a few weeks ago, honestly, there's no way, there's no way to alarm that. We have, and I'm not sure if you received the email, but we have a very sophisticated alarm system now. We monitor over 400 or 500 alarms, close to that. And our pump stations, the closer you get to the facility, the larger the flow is. And what we discharged during that event, if you would have broke it out, how much was per day, is not even a blip on the radar of what we receive at the facility. So there's no way to detect that at the facility level. The only other way you would be able to detect that would be at our pump stations. And we actually have in our 3 largest pump stations an alarm system that's set up that if there is some kind of a failure upstream, if we don't hit a minimum amount of flow that reaches that station in a 24-hour period, it'll alarm us and say, hey, you got something going on upstream. Because we know under the most severe dry conditions, we're always going to produce a certain amount of flow through that station. So we do have those types of fail-safes in our stations now. Unfortunately, this wasn't a station. This was a gravity line, gravity flow to our facility. The only way we would have noticed it would have been at the facility, which there's no way to notice.
Thanks,
notice
Chris.
that, so.
Okay, anything else? Hearing nothing, let's move on to the next item, which is, thanks again. Joe, consider adopting town manager's goals per the town manager contract. I'd like to really thank Jerry and Joe for working so hard on this. I know I had some comments, and they were nice enough to consider them and change them, and we have the Iowa Hawkeye colors in the original presentation for Joe. So, Joe, you want to do this quickly, or Jerry
Sure,
do
well,
this quickly?
I mean, Jerry did the most work on this. I think the point now is to have the board adopt these goals, and then the next step will be to come up with kind of the specific measurables. So this isn't the last time that this will come before the board, but I think we wanted to get some unification around just simply what are the goals, okay, check. And then the next step will be for Jerry and I to come up with some ideas on measurables to look against it. But
I
here we
assume
are.
that everyone has taken the time to review these in advance and have, if you had any comments, you probably would have submitted them already. If not, then.
Can I apologize for I actually didn't look at it until yesterday and forgot to send them today. And it really isn't, I don't have any problem. It's more of wording on the stormwater goal. It just seems very worded to essentially say that we are moving towards a stormwater utility, but as Chris mentioned when we just thought at the last meeting, I mean, there are lots of other options other than a stormwater utility. And all of these goals seem to be directed towards, yes, we are going to do a stormwater utility. And I'm not sure if it's just a wording thing or.
Number 3 says provide information on alternative structures.
Right, but it says that then it's of a stormwater utility. And I thought the discussion last meeting was, well, there could be something other than a stormwater meeting. So I say it's minor.
Yeah.
And so.
Good point.
It's just, if
That's
we
a
could
good
just
point.
deal with
Yeah.
that
It's a
wording
good
to
point.
make sure that there are other options.
That's a good point.
Well, we can always go forward and adopt this. We can always amend it too.
That's fine.
Yeah, when we do the objectives and
Yeah.
measurables. Yeah.
So,
That's a good
anything
point.
else? If not, I'd thank you for your work. Thank you for considering the comments.
Jerry
I
really
provided.
worked hard on
Jerry,
this.
you really took the laboring oar on this. Appreciate it. So, someone like to make a motion adopting the town manager goals
I think
to be included with the town manager's contract? Moved by Colleen. Is there a second? Seconded by John. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Great. Next, and that's actually applies to number 3 on the next page also, if you're going to make that change. 18, consider adopting the Select Board's Public Outreach and Civic Engagement Plan. Joe, you want to take it, or John? I know this was something you were real interested in, or?
I can kick it off, but I think that this was maybe something John and Colleen had some ideas on during their reelection campaigns, and some of the things that they heard from just people when they were talking to them, is that they were hoping that the select board could maybe engage in different ways with the community, and so that's what this plan is to try to encourage. And I took a play out of John Zacconi's comment at the last meeting saying, you know, don't try to kill yourself on the first year, and maybe make sure the plan is manageable and not so expansive that, you know, we just can never meet it. So I pared down, you know, those 9 or 10 ideas that was shared with you 2 weeks ago to maybe something that hopefully you feel is manageable within the year. But, you know, this is your plan, and I'll definitely do my part to help facilitate implementing this or some version of it. But this is definitely the select board's thing.
I felt that this is on target with what we wanted to attempt to, you know, to stimulate the population in a different way, give people an opportunity to, you know, talk to us, you know, in the mornings or whatever time of day we do things, at the farmer's market, that type of thing. And I think in the spirit of it, we can split it up among the board to provide coverage so that it's, you know,
You'll take
it's
the
not a
coffee
burden.
things, I'll do the bar.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, you good?
Sounds good.
All right.
So I'm very comfortable with it. I think it's a great start, and until we do something, we don't know, you know, and I think that this is the kind of thing that we could try it. If it doesn't go so well, then we can change it, but we've got to start somewhere.
Okay, anybody else have any comment?
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. I have 2 concerns. I mean, I think this is great. I don't have any problem with the concept. But a number of things that, one, these are very, essentially, the first section, they're very specific. And so do we have formal invitations from both, from the Wake Robin administration and the Rotary officials to, have they agreed to this?
No, and if you want to amend it to keep those open, I guess I just plugged 2 in,
Okay.
but you could leave
Well-
those open.
Yeah, and I would recommend that, because this also looks like we're selecting groups. And I think if we opened it up to the community and sort of said, hey, the select board's interested, you know, who's interested in having that? We may get a lot of response of other people are interested in having this. So rather than pre-selecting the entities that would host the select board, if we could make it open, I'd feel much more comfortable with that. And that in some ways goes to number 2 as well, of identifying Village Wine and Coffee as the only place that this would happen. Now, I can see there's a certain amount of consistency that's good with that people would want to know on a regular basis, but there might be a rotating thing. So I'm just a little shy about predefining where these events would be happening.
I think to address the Wake Robin, it was quite obvious during my reelection campaigning that the population at Wake Robin really wanted to interact with the board, and it's difficult for them to attend our meetings.
Right.
So I thought that the best way to kind of address that was to go reach out and do something. I do know in the case of the Rotary, in talking to a number of people that are members of that, they would love to interact with this group, but they just don't know how to do it.
Right.
So I think the reason, you know, it's nice these 2 are the first ones is we're going to learn a ton, but it also gives us greater impact.
right.
And I think by, you know, identifying the Rotary as one of the first ones, it gives us all those options you're talking about.
Right.
I think, you know, we also have Shelburne Bay to go to. In my dream of this is that we go to places we set up portable voting at, so that we have, people see who they're talking to or who's representing them. and that kind of
So
thing.
I would agree with that, but just without a formal invitation, I would be really, without the Wake Robin administration saying, yes, we can do this, I'm really hesitant to say we're going to do it.
Okay, I have a suggestion to move this along faster. How about just a motion that adopts a plan similar in spirit to the one that's been presented to us?
Let me make a quick comment. If we just simply say plans to hold and plans to hold, we've identified these as desirable venues.
By
And
the
then
way, I
add
don't
a,
think they're all desirable myself.
excuse me?
I have issues with some of these venues, and the reason I do is there is no television coverage.
No, well, that remains an issue, but my sense is if we just simply say plans to hold, and then have a third bullet, and we'll explore other venues as these may become available, then that seems to, that would seem to address the concerns.
That would be fine.
And that allows Joe to be,
Okay, can I ask a question now? So, because I remember you and I had talked about this, and we had specifically talked about Wake Robin because there are voting booths there. Are there also, so the Shelburne, or the Rotary, how did that enter in?
A whole different thing. Members of the Rotary have talked about, hey, could we find a way to interact with the group outside of its regular meetings, so.
So, because I think my concern is, we have meetings every other week. We have special meetings. We have extra budget meetings. And I definitely like the idea of doing Wake Robin because I feel like we have a responsibility because we have voting booths there. But if we start saying, well, this group wants to have a special select board meeting, well, now this group does too. And all of a sudden, we don't just have two, we've got like a list of groups that all want to have special meetings. And when we had talked about this at the retreat, in response, Gary, to your comment about there's no TV coverage, I think, at least the conversation I remember is this isn't going to be a generalized select board meeting. This is going to be a special select board meeting to just address issues at Wake Robin. And I personally felt that there was a responsibility based on the voting booth argument. And so I don't know if I actually agree with the idea, not that I don't want to interact with the Rotary, but I'm almost wondering if when we talk about having like a community mixer or a monthly coffee, if that's like a place where we can advertise to the Rotary, come in and interact with us individually.
I think we could do it that way, but if we go back to our earlier discussion about economic development this evening, it seems to me that to really kickstart that type of thing, having a targeted meeting with the members of the Rotary would be an ideal way for us to present this concept and to see if we can get some momentum behind it. So
Or maybe we can have that as an agenda item with a special invitation to them to come to our
we
meeting.
can do it that way too. But,
Yeah.
I just thought it might be a good way to really kickstart that type of effort, so.
And then Josh, like, I kind of agree with you, like, the idea of, like, I love the idea of having a Village Wine and Coffee, but I have a feeling that there'd be a little bit of pushback from some other businesses, like Harrington's.
Or Brugger's.
Or Brugger's,
Right.
yeah. And maybe that needs to be, I don't know, maybe we can say, if anybody would like to host this in the mornings, please let us know, and then we can rotate them. But I don't know, I'm just throwing these ideas out here because I agree with you, like having like a consistent place every single week so people know that they can come, kind of like, Jessica Brumstead has said Tuesday evenings at the library, right? At the library, like she's always available, that's kind of nice. Or Joan Lennis used to do Brugger's Bagels every morning, or every Tuesday morning.
So do we want to vote on this now, or do we want to massage it and vote on it next meeting?
Well, if we delay it, then I would suggest that everybody make comments, send some comments to Joe so he can prepare, so we don't run into this situation again. So we try to move things forward. Are you good with that?
Yeah, I mean, like, it's your plan. This was something that the board really wanted to do, the more you keep delaying it, it's like, all of a sudden, the year is
year's
over.
right?
But it's your plan.
Okay, so, I take it you prefer to wait a week or 2 weeks?
Yeah.
What about Jerry, what about you? I mean, if somebody wants to make a motion, we can make a motion, vote, you know.
I'd be okay making adjustments to this and providing for additions and, as we go along, because we're gonna, and this is, there's an experiential dimension to this too. We don't know how this is all gonna work. We don't know whether VCAM coverage is really gonna be problematic. We don't, I happen to have been there with Joe having coffee when he talked to Kevin about the Village Cafe, and it coincided with Kevin's discussion of the extra room that he was going to have. So he was going to have a meeting room, in effect, which is not, which certainly I wouldn't think, from my experience at Harrington, that they have or could provide. And, but I recognize that we shouldn't appear to be favoring one locality over another. But I think we could make a general statement to the effect that we will explore other locales as they become, as possible venues. And I'd rather do that than delay this another 2 weeks.
Right, yeah, I'd like to get it started.
So if I'd be fine with that too. So, I mean, on the first one, if we could say, the select board will ask to hold a meeting at Wake Robin, that would be fine.
And I trust in Joe to make the editorial changes.
So does someone like to make a motion?
Well, I move trusting in Joe to make the editorial changes as discussed, that we approve this plan as presented.
Okay, moved by Jerry, is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by John. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Nay.
Did you vote nay?
I voted nay.
2
I
nays?
voted nay.
Yeas? All right, just want to make sure I got 3 yeas and 2 nays.
Okay, next is item 19, consider approving wastewater allocations. Joe, all these been vetted?
They have, I don't think they're in your packet, they were on the online, they've been paid, they've been, everything is fine. So there's 2 of them to approve.
Well, do you want to give us some, a little more information as what we're approving? Who is it for?
Sorry. So there's one that is, consider approving 996 gallons per day wastewater allocation to KH LLC, and I'm sorry, I don't have it right in front of me, and then there's 26 gallons per day to Mechanicsville LLC. Sorry, hold on, KH LLC is Gray Rock Road. That's the 996, and then the 26 for Mechanicsville LLC is 352 Collimer Circle. They've both been paid and.
Okay,
recommend approval.
and vetted.
Yeah.
All right, someone like to move to approve those 2 wastewater allocations?
Do you want them in separate motions?
Unless someone has an objection, no.
No.
Move to approve 996 GPD wastewater allocation to KH LLC and 26 GPD wastewater allocation Mechanicsville LLC.
Moved by Colleen, is there a second?
Second it.
Seconded by John. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Next item. This is, we have 2 reasons to enter into executive session. First is, I'd like to make a finding that premature disclosure of our strategy in regard to the collective bargaining agreement negotiations with the New England Police Benevolent Association would place the town and the association at a substantial disadvantage. We're discussing strategy for the negotiations. Does anyone like to make that motion? Moved by Colleen, is there?
Second.
Seconded by Jerry. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Then I'd entertain a motion to enter executive session pursuant to 1 VSA 313 to discuss collective bargaining agreement negotiations with the New England Police Benevolent Association and invite the town manager. Moved by Colleen, is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Jerry. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor? Aye. Next is an item that just came to our attention in regard to the Bar Farm conservation that it involved a town commitment of $150,000, I believe it was. I learned today that someone representing one of the parties has been a client of mine in my professional capacity as an attorney, and to my knowledge, according to court documents, I'm still that attorney of record. So I am, pursuant to the conflict of and ethics ordinance in town, I've disclosed my conflict, and I am going to recuse myself and encourage you guys to seek Joe's advice to make the proper motion. All right, and I'm going to leave the room pursuant to the obligation set forth under the conflict of interest ordinance.
Gary? So actually, John, you're the vice chair, so you'll have to call for the votes if you want. And on this, before you make the motion, I'll recommend to the board that you invite Gail Albert, the chair of the Natural Resources and Conservation Commission, and Dean Pierce, the director of Planning and Zoning. This is one that would only require one motion, so we don't need a finding, but I'm suggesting that the select board enter executive session pursuant to 1 VSA 313 to discuss real estate options regarding a property purchased through the open space fund.
So moved.
Or involving open space funds.
So, we have a second? Any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
All right. I think maybe if
You want to do
Gary,
that one first?
maybe if Gary's amenable, we can do that one first.
Yeah.
So we can.